Okay, good morning. I think we'll get started here. This session is Perfusion a la carte, our second to last session of the conference. We are going to start off with a presentation from Anita Parker. She was our most recent Perfusion Without Borders scholarship recipient. She is a second-year perfusion student at Rush and is currently in her second rotation at UF Health Shands Children's Hospital. The Perfusion Without Borders Scholarship is funded by the foundation and also the North Carolina Perfusion Society. And it pays for a student to join a mission trip, covers their travel and accommodation expenses. So welcome, Anita. We look forward to hearing about your trip.
I brought a stool. I wanted to make sure you guys could see. All right, so good morning. As Molly mentioned, my name is Anita Parker, and I am a second-year perfusion student from Rush University. I am honored to be here today to present about my 2-week mission trip to Kigali, Rwanda with Novik Cardiac Alliance, courtesy of receiving this year's Perfusion Without Borders scholarship. Disclosures: I have nothing to disclose. So first, I would like to begin my presentation by sharing with you a little about myself. Well, I'm from Peru. My birth mother grew up on a cacao plantation in the Peruvian Amazon, and my birth father grew up in the Peruvian Andes. In the mid-1980s, they lived and worked on an orange grove in the Peruvian countryside. The center picture is of my birth mother and my birth brother. My birth mother was 16 when she had my brother and 18 when she had me. When she was 9 months pregnant with me, she and my birth father were in a motorcycle accident that resulted in my birth father's death and my birth. Alone with 2 young children, my birth mother accepted the help from my birth paternal grandparents. However, she did not know their offer to help came with a stipulation. They had planned to remarry her in exchange for land. When she refused this marriage, the paternal grandparents retaliated by kidnapping my brother and I. While my birth mother successfully got us back, it did not stop them from taking us several more times. My birth mother realized she could not provide her children a good life and selflessly decided to put us up for adoption to ensure our safety. While my time in Peru was challenging, the experience gave me an appreciation for life. Furthermore, it made me aware of life in a developing country. Then at 2.5, my mom, the picture on the right, adopted me as a single mother. She was a clinical nurse specialist in pediatric psychiatry. So what ignited my passion for global health and medical mission work? Well, my first inspiration was my mom, on the picture on the left. She had a desire to help children from socially and economically disadvantaged backgrounds and instilled within me a strong sense of social justice. She even took part in mission trips to New Orleans, helping to clean up after Hurricane Katrina. She even wrote a book to help children affected by Katrina cope after losing their homes. My second inspiration was the book Mountains Beyond Mountains, a book about Dr. Paul Farmer and Partners in Health, a nonprofit organization that aims to increase access to healthcare in developing countries. Dr. Farmer's humanitarian work inspired me to volunteer at the PAH headquarters in Boston, Mass. Then in 2014, I returned to Peru for the first time since leaving in 1990 to participate in a medical mission trip to the Peruvian Amazon with the organization Amazon Promise, pictured to the right. I enjoyed my trip so much that I returned for my second trip in 2016. Both trips were educational, humbling, and rewarding. These experiences made me realize how important mission work was to me. However, the next step was to see how I could connect it to my other passion, perfusion. Novik Cardiac Alliance. While working as a perfusion assistant in Boston, I got the opportunity to work with Novik Cardiac Alliance. The hospital I was working with was donating supplies to aid with the war in Ukraine, and I was in charge of ordering and shipping of these supplies. Additionally, during this process, I learned about the possibility of going on mission trips as a perfusionist. My prior experience with the NCA is why I selected this organization for my PWOB mission trip. The Novik Cardiac Alliance, formerly the International Children's Heart Foundation, has made over 557 trips from 1993 to the present and has worked in over 20 countries. Additionally, the NCA has 4 core principles, which are collaborate, innovate, educate, and sustain. The goal of the NCA is for partner sites to develop full independence over time, operate on and care for children with a homegrown team of experts, and no continuing need for direct outside assistance. So I got the amazing opportunity to travel with the NCA to Kigali, Rwanda. Kigali is the capital of Rwanda and has a population of around 1.3 million people. In 1994, there was the Rwandan genocide, which resulted in the loss of over 800,000 lives. Since then, the country of Rwanda has done an incredible job at rebuilding itself. While in Kigali, the NCA team worked at King Faisal Hospital, a hospital that was built between 1987 and 1991. However, the pediatric cardiac program is new, having just started in 2023. So my trip with the NCA to Kigali took place from February 25th to March 9th. This slide lists the NCA ORT members along with some of the King Faisal Hospital ORT members. I was very lucky to have Lazo as a preceptor during this trip. He has been a perfusionist for 25 years with the NCA for 13. I was also very lucky to meet TG, Peter, Emmanuel, the perfusionists at King Faisal Hospital. They were incredibly warm and welcoming, and I learned a lot from each of them and enjoyed gaining a new perspective on perfusion from them. Our surgeons during this trip were Dr. Yayu and Dr. Vitali. In addition to bringing an OR team, the NCA also brings a PICU team. Someone said during the trip, it doesn't matter how well you do in the OR if you don't have a solid ICU team, and I believe this to be true. This slide lists the NCA PICU team. Everyone was really busy during the week and had different schedules, so it was hard to get a group picture. So this to the bottom right is a picture from one of our team dinners. Case types. So how many cases did we perform? Well, we performed 20 bypass cases in 10 days. Working with only one OR, our average days were around 12 to 13 hours long. After the case finished, as a team, we wheeled the patient to the ICU. This meant wheeling their bed down an outside corridor, rain or shine. As for case types, well, this is what surprised me. Going into this trip, I did not expect to observe such complex cases. As you can see in the table, we did a couple arterial switches along with the truncus. I was really impressed by both teams' ability to handle these case types. On the right are a few pictures of some of the patients. Perfusion equipment. So here's a list of the equipment we used at our site. We used a Sorin S3, a 3T heater cooler, Medtronic Affinity PIC-C, oxygenator reservoir. We used one Affinity Fusion for the one adult congenital case we had. We did Medtronic ACT Plus, iStat, and we made our own Anita cardioplegia. So challenges and solutions. So one of the interesting things there is the delivery mechanism for cardioplegia. Due to cost and availability of the myotherm, cardioplegia was delivered by anesthesia through a pressure bag or via syringe for babies. When not in use, we placed this cardioplegia bag in an ice bucket under the head of the bed. I thought that was very interesting because there's no way to measure the pressure that we were delivering it at. Additionally, we had a shortage of ACT cartridges. At the end of the first week, we ran into our first real challenge. We were almost out of ACT cartridges, so we decided to split the 2-channel test cartridges and only run one at a time. If a result seemed inaccurate, we would run a regular 2-channel cartridge to confirm the previous result. Another challenge for one of the cases was when the top of a hemoconcentrator popped off during a case. This was quickly solved by tie banding the top of the hemoconcentrator. Additionally, for our last case, while we were rewarming, we lost oxygen flow to our oxygenator. Thankfully, the team there kept spare boots on the pump, and they were quickly able to use the boot to connect it to a spare portable O2 tank. So what I learned from this trip. I also learned from this trip was how pressure management in the OR connects to quick extubation of patients in the PICU. With limited ICU beds, it was important to get patients extubated as soon as possible. Therefore, in the OR, vasopressin was not used. Instead, isoflurane was heavily utilized to help with pressure management. I also learned with limited resources, it's important to be able to think outside the box to solve problems. Lastly, this trip confirmed my passion for medical mission work. Well, maybe a few years before I can partake in a mission trip as a perfusionist, in the meantime, I will continue to help by collecting expired supplies for donation. These are a few of my references. Here are some pictures. I was able to go on a safari in one day, so I wanted to include that of the beautiful countryside. And I want to thank again the AMSAC Perfusion Without Borders Committee for giving me this incredible opportunity. It was so rewarding and life-changing. And that's it. Thank you, guys.
The song. Thank you, Anita, for sharing that story with us. It's very inspiring. Thank you. Our next talk is by Bill Riley, and he is the Chief of Perfusion at Boston Medical Center and current president of the American Board of Cardiovascular Perfusion.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I am Bill Riley. I know it said David Boyne was going to be doing this in a few places. Sorry, it's me, but we'll get through this together. So I am the current president of your American Board of Cardiovascular Perfusion, and I'm fond of saying that because we're here for all of us. Here we go. So as of February 24th, these are your directors for the rest of this year and until February of next year. So it's really the 2024 directors, but I put the 25 in there as well. So if you go on our website, you'll see really fancy pictures of all of us, but for now, just the names. So I am president. Emily Collins is VP. Sorry. Oh, why? I am. They look great. Am I doing something? Okay. Dan, we good? Thank you. I'm not David Boyne, the whole thing. Okay, anyway, moving along. Here are your, we are 8 directors for this year. Myself as president, Emily Collins is VP, Emily Caring's our treasurer, Kirsten Calise is secretary. Our directors are David Boyne, Joanna Ibses, Scott Nesgus, and Caleb Varner. Our national office moved. They used to be in Hattiesburg, Dems. If you've been a perfusionist for a little while, you knew them, you loved them. They were great. They retired, Beth and Steve and the folks who worked with them. So now we hired Executive Director Incorporated. They're in Milwaukee. It's been a great transition for us. It's been a lot of work, but we have a full staff of really 5 people who work with us. So our Executive Director is Jeannie Rhodes. She's like the Beth of this company. And then Philip Bailey is our certification manager. So if you ever called Hattiesburg and you talked to Pat Kirkland, that's Philip now. He's trying his best to be even remotely as warm and welcoming as Pat was, but he'll get there. They're all great. Alyssa Lynch and Ellie work to do a lot of the administrative functions of the board. And Tara Withington is one of the owners of the company. She's our consulting partner, but they're all very much hands-on, and they've learned more about perfusion in the last year and a half than I ever thought was possible. So they've been great to work with, and they're responsible for a lot of the advancements that I'm about to talk about. So what's new with the board? That's really why I'm here. So there have been a couple really exciting, we think, changes coming down the line. Some of them you'll see, some of them you may not. But the big one is digital certificates and letters. So when you go on your online filing system, which I'm sure you all do regularly, you're going to see a banner. And you're going to be able to pull up your certificate and letter anytime you need it. You don't have to call like I used to all the time to ask for a replacement because you couldn't find it when the CLIA people came looking for it. So it'll always be there. The sad thing about this, no more little tiny envelopes with your sticker. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking we probably put some poor family business out of business because they're not making 1,500 of these little tiny envelopes anymore. But hopefully they find some other use for them. And then what we'll do is there's going to be a revised paper certificate, and I'll show you those in a couple slides, but everyone will get a nice fancy certificate to hang above their desk or in their office or stick in their nightstand, wherever they do with it. We're on LinkedIn. I thought I'd have a link check it out. I think we have 19 followers, so it'd be super great if we had like 100 by the end of today. Doing a quick head count. Yeah, this means you. So anyway, if you want to join, it's really going to be mostly informative for people. But what it'll do is it'll allow the LinkedIn page to send messages. So it'll be a great way for us to broadcast messages out to folks if you follow us on LinkedIn. So we have many updates to our website as well. So Daniel, would you mind pulling that up, please? On the board, we always talk about how we're a little bit different than most people because we do this stuff like literally every day. So for us, we think that everyone knows this, but you may not go on the website very often. So if you can scroll up a little bit, Daniel, please, just to the top. So you see it looks a little bit different. We're getting there. It's still not gonna like blow your socks off this, website, but it's getting there, right? So functionally speaking, you'll see that there's a couple different places you can click on. We have the cool banner that slides around. I wish I could see. Is there a way for me to see that down here, or is it just up there? Sorry. Okay, that's cool. Instead of me toggling around and wasting everyone's time right now, I highly recommend you just check out the website on your own, and you'll see that there's a lot of features. What we're really excited about, if you could scroll down a little bit more, Daniel, is upcoming events. We have I think the most forthcoming number of meetings are going to be shown there, and news and updates we'll have as they come along, which is pretty cool. We have a prospective CCP section now. And not only is that going to be helpful for folks who are thinking about getting into perfusion or students who are going to be taking their exams, but it also provides links to our accrediting bodies. If you scroll up, Daniel, and click on prospective CCPs, that one may be worth looking into. Keep going up. Keep going, sorry. The blue above updates. Yep. So sorry, I thought I'd be able to. Sure, click on any of them, we'll figure it out. Great. So this is basically a summary of what it takes to become certified. It talks about the exams, and then PBSC and the CAPE. And then if you want to scroll up and hit the other tabs real quick. Actually, you can do it on the left and the other. There you go. Thank you. So test site details. This is a change that's made. You may be hearing about it, maybe not. We use Pearson VUE for our testing sites. And recently we got some notifications from out in the field that using any Pearson VUE site might not be ideal. So we went to a tier 1 only testing site option. So I'm going to tell you right now that they're not as plentiful as all of the sites were, but they provide a more consistent and secure environment for these folks to take their tests. And we felt as a board that it was worthwhile. We're trying not to make it difficult for anyone to take their board exams, but we want to make sure that when they do, they're doing it in an environment that's quiet and secure, just so everyone's on the same page. Could you hit the next tab down, please? Yep, great, that's perfect. So we talk about accredited programs, what it takes to become accredited. I know we kind of keep an eye out there on the interwebs, so to speak. We know what people are talking about. As a board, there's only 8 directors, and there's, like I said, 5 folks in the office, but we try to keep an eye on what's going on, and we try to provide information for people to know that we're doing what we can to protect everyone. So this talks about the accrediting process and how the ACPE and KHEP are involved, and the Perfusion Program Directors Council is involved. And this also gives a list of the accredited schools in the US and Canada. Canada also has the Canadian Society of Clinical Perfusion. They're kind of like a catch-all society, whereas they're the American board, ACPE, PPDC, all kind of wrapped into one. So we're working very closely with them to make sure that we're in lockstep with those guys as much as possible. All right, and I think there's one more tab in this one. Yeah, there's just the basic links to the different societies that we're related to. So, all right, I think we spent enough time on this. So, can we go back to the main website, please? Okay, so also we post our annual survey results there. We've published those results, but we found that it's a lot more efficient if we just self-publish and put them on our website. So when you go to recertify, you're going to have a survey to fill out. So thanks and sorry at the same time. We do take that information. I know a lot of folks really appreciate knowing what's going on out there. So, I humbly ask that you take the time to fill out the survey, because this information is, we're in a unique position where we don't force people to do it, but we get usually a very, very compelling response rate for this. So that's great. Two items that are there that you may or may not know. It's a section called Beyond the Pump. So we do what's called a CCP Spotlight in the in memoriam section. So CCP Spotlight is a place for us to kind of write an article about someone who's influential in our field. So I think we're on the fourth one now. Mary Ann Overton is our newest. I think she went up last week. With Steve Sutton before her. So one of the board directors writes an article just spotlighting their career. And it's a really nice kind of like feature for us to do for people. So if anyone knows anyone in the field who might be a good candidate for this, please reach out to the national office and suggest it. In memoriam, Emily Collins started building and maintaining this database about 4 years ago. So if you go on the website, you can find a list of all CCPs who have passed. And there are some featured folks on there too. So that's a real nice thing. We think it's important that people can look and see who has passed on, who did this before us. While all this is happening, like I mentioned, EDI, our new management company, is a large corporation. They have like 300 employees, including an IT team. So we do all of our IT work mostly in-house with them. So they're always working to increase our bandwidth and make sure that our online presence is stable and capable of processing all the information that comes our way. There were some issues last year with the online filing system. Hopefully those have been resolved. The CSV uploads are a top priority, ... That's really all I can say about that right now. I know you guys are dying for them and we're working on it as hard as we can. We just had to fix some baseline fundamental. I'm not a computer guy. So basically they needed to fix some stuff before we can start working on that. So we'll just leave it at that. So here's the digital annual certificate that you're going to be able to get on the online filing system. So again, you're not going to get mailed one of these every 3 years in a big manila envelope. I remember wondering if I was going to get a cardboard envelope or a manila little envelope every year because I don't keep track of that stuff. But now you can go on and just print it off on your own. If you happen to have a color printer, great. If not, that's fine too. If you need a paper copy, we will have those available eventually. But right now, hopefully people can get by with this, and it'll be along with your letter as well. So every year it'll reflect the directors who are on if you go like December 1st to get it, it will reflect the directors from the previous year. But we're excited about this. It's going to be great, not only environmentally friendly, but it's going to allow us to be more in control of making sure everyone has what they need every year. So you're also, like I mentioned, going to get a revised fancy certificate that you can hang up. This is like the one that came in the big envelope every 3 years. Now we're going to send you a one. So what it'll have is, this is like a mashup here. So it'll have your name and underneath and your number, and then underneath it'll have the year you became certified, and then it says that it must be renewed annually. So and then I believe the directors at the time the certificate is printed are going to be on there. We're still working on that. The first batch of those, I think to cycle 3 people, are going to be going out in a few months. So hang tight and you'll get that soon enough. So the booklet of information is something that I look at all the time, and I know probably most of you don't. I highly recommend you check it out, though. There's a lot of good background information in there. It'll help you kind of figure out how the board runs and what we're up to. We updated it. We got rid of a lot of redundant information, and we actually have links in our table of contents now. It's pretty fancy, but I think there's a lot of good information in there for any CCP to know. Not like you're going to be quizzed about it, but it's good to have. I usually keep a copy on my laptop, desktop, just to have quick reference for. Again, I had this slide just in case we didn't have the link. So Daniel, thank you for that. We can skip over that one. So here's our cases. This is one of the ways we streamlined our OFS and our booklet of information, is we really just have one set of tables now. So there are tables for primary and secondary cases. One thing that I'm very happy to report is that we added NRP as a primary case for a primary operator and a secondary case if you're the secondary operator of NRP. This is along with OCS and a few other procedures. So that's great. I'm really happy we were able to get that done as soon as possible so we can stay relevant as that field literally explodes right in front of us. There was a change too. So if you look and you say, I've never done an ex vivo before, that's because we changed one of the designations. So if you put in cases like last year and you go in there now, it's going to look a little wonky, but we're keeping track of it in the background. So don't feel like you need to edit anything. We'll take care of that. I'm here to provide that message, and I think it's on our website. If not, it's going to be there soon. Here's a 24-year history of like the numbers, right? I always kind of get a kick out of this. A lot of chatter out there is saying, there are a lot of new perfusion schools coming on. There's going to be a lot more graduates coming around. The last 5 years, starting last year, we increased by 128. Then before that, it was 95, 133, 104, and 95. So that's the total number of CCPs. We are going to eclipse 5,000 CCPs next year, which is kind of cool because it's also like the 50th year. So I don't know if that's meant to be or not, but I think it's a little scary and kind of cool too. So this is another one, not particularly useful, but it says where the CCPs live by state. And I always kind of get a kick out of this too. So Massachusetts, we tend to be a little bit, egocentric. We're not actually the center of the universe in perfusion. So it's good for me to remind myself of that every once in a while. So please reach out. Honestly, we're there to serve you. We want people to share their ideas, their questions, their concerns with us. It's not me answering the phone, so it's easy for me to say, but you may get to me or one of the other folks on the board if you reach out, info@abcp.org. They also have a phone number. And on behalf of all of us at the American Board, I'd like to thank AMSEC for inviting us to be here and thank all of you for being here on a Sunday morning, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill, for that update. Our last speaker of the session is Michael Colligan, who's a certified clinical perfusionist and registered nurse. He currently serves as the executive director of the ORRUM Patient Safety Organization and is working on developing novel evidence-based guidelines for perfusion training, real-time clinical decision support, equipment design and selection, and validated simulation programs.
Thank you for the introduction. I must have copied that word for word from last year. Thank you, AMSEC, for allowing me the chance to speak. We have 2 audience response survey questions in this presentation. It's going to be hard to follow the profound stories we heard earlier from Anita, but this will be a fun, short presentation, and hopefully we'll get a little feedback going. If the audience response questionnaire doesn't work well, I'm going to take a show of hands. So have your phone and the show of hands ready. And to go back on the audience response survey, you click on today's agenda, this session, and then about in the middle is the polls where you can submit your response. So I'm going to talk about tools outside the operating room. What do you have available to you as a perfusionist to understand something that I'll call availability bias and risk? As was mentioned earlier, I'm an employee. My paycheck comes from ORRUM Clinical Analytics, and I run the ORRUM Patient Safety Organization. I'll mention them briefly towards the end of my talk. What is availability bias and how might it affect your practice? Well, let's look at a common story of something that might happen somewhere like California, but there's stories like this that could go on anywhere. After an earthquake in California, people purchase earthquake insurance in large numbers, wide swaths of the population. They undertake earthquake mitigation strategies. These are things like providing extra bracing and strapping down your hot water heater, or things like this in your household. People purchase and accumulate emergency supplies so that they have them when needed. Those are the things that happen right after an earthquake occurs. Now, when it's been many years since an earthquake, insurance rates go down substantially. The overall diligence lessens, and generally complacency increases. And these are kind of the definitions of availability bias. Something is not available readily in your memory, so you don't prepare or act on it. Now, let's look at availability bias in more general sense. If you ask a common person walking around, maybe not on the suburban street, but around in the US or another area, another part of the country, you ask that person, what's the cause of death? What cause of death has the highest frequency? And the average person will disproportionately say something that's very salient in their mind, something that's very available in their mind. They'll say something like lightning strikes, tornadoes, car accidents. Those are the things that people feel are causing deaths. But the real answers, as many of you may know, are much more mundane things, but they're not as available in the average person's mind. There are things like stroke, like diabetes, like asthma. Those cause far more deaths, orders of magnitude larger than these really salient things that pop into people's heads. So generally speaking, availability bias is going to impact what you think will be a problem in any area of your life. And this can happen as well during bypass. What's going to cause you problems during bypass? The things that will tend to pop into your mind are things that those ideas are impacted by the frequency that they occur, how recently they occur, and also how salient they are, how impactful they are in your memory. Generally speaking, when you look across all areas of clinical practice, but also people's lives, you tend to prepare and expect the worst situation that's happened to you or someone that you know closely. If your sister or your mother or somebody else has been in an earthquake, you are more likely to prepare for an earthquake. But if it's not someone you know closely, if it's the entire state of California and you don't know anyone there, you won't prepare for an earthquake, generally speaking. So let's transition with this line of thinking in mind to this audience participation survey. And I'm kind of setting everyone up for failure, but let's ask the question anyway. Does everyone in your group set up and prime the cardioplegia system in the same way for the same case? And Daniel, if we could pop into the results. Okay, well, this is interesting. I didn't expect quite so many yeses. But when we look at this, we're talking again about standardization and narrowing the variance in care. So it's good to see these yeses, but I am going to jump on here and see if we can throw a little mud in this water here. So Daniel, if we could go back to the main slides, we'll advance here. This is a standard 4-to-1 cardioplegia setup. This could be any manufacturer. In fact, I don't even remember which one this is, but take any standard 4-to-1 cardioplegia setup. How many different ways could you set up the cardioplegia? I've asked only a handful of questions here, and we're not going to go through each one, but I want you to ask these to yourself. As far as a general thought process, getting fluid through the tubing, there's probably 4 different ways you could do that. There might be more. You could take it out. I know people who take it out of the roller head and let it self-prime. I know people who prime the blood path and then the crystalloid path separately. I know people who prime it on the negative side of a roller and then prime both sides of the positive. So there's at least 4 different ways to do that. Do you recirculate that after you've primed it? If you recirculate, do you recirculate it warm? Do you recirculate it cold? Or do you recirculate it both ways? Do you test? I should have used slightly larger font. Do you test the roller head occlusion before and after, or just before or just after? Let's see. What speed do you recirculate it at if you recirculate it? Do you use the bubble detector? Yes or no? And then where do you use the bubble detector? Before the heat exchanger and bubble trap, after the heat exchanger and bubble trap, but before any connection to the field, or after the heat exchanger bubble trap and after any connection to the field. And then pressure detection, do you measure your pressure? Is it connected to an alarm? And if so, is the alarm audible, or is it audible and servo regulation? Yes, and so those are just, I think those are 8 questions, but approximately. And there's other things that you could do differently, right? So if you assume, boy, look, there's a lot of different ways to set that up. And I think, did I say here? Yes. Actually, if you go through the math, well, I advanced, but if you go through the math, there's over 1,000 different ways, given those 8 or 9 questions that I had, that you could set up the cardioplegia system. So while we think maybe we are standardized, and maybe some facilities are, there's probably a lot of small variation in there that we don't take into account. So we'll go to our next audience survey sample question. Why do you use the specific technique that you do to prime the cardioplegia system? And Daniel, if we could pop on over to this. Some of my colleagues, you know, I put up some of the common answers that I hear. Well, this is the fastest way to do it, so that's why I do it this way. This is the best at de-airing, so I use this technique. A lot of people like to say it's our policy. One of my teammates said, well, I do it this way because I like these colors. So I prime the blue first and then the red. Maybe you were just taught that way. There's an other. We have just a few answers on the other. Okay. And a lot of times we don't think about answer E. Is it the lowest risk or is it the safest? And what makes us think that? So Daniel, I'm going to pop back over to the main slides. And a lot of us, at least myself, but probably a lot of us were taught, there are many ways to peel an egg in perfusion. And I think a lot of us were taught that because in some ways we don't want to hurt feelings. But we need to know, is one way really better than another? Or does it matter? Are all the ways of doing something equivalent? That may or may not be the case, but we really don't know. So I wanted to ask myself, and I wanted us to ask ourselves, in what ways are we only protecting against events that show up on our availability bias? What different information, what tools outside of the operating room do we have that could help us reduce our availability bias and look at predicted problems versus reported problems so that we can use those tools to understand both our availability bias and the risk? So this is just the first 4 decision points in those 8 or 9 questions that I asked. And I'm going to use this rough structure as your decision tree on how you set up your cardioplegia. It's not intended to be accurate or to scale. And we're going to briefly review the AMSEC standards and guidelines, the AMSEC FMEA archives, public reports available through the PEERS 2 system from the ANZZP, public reports available through the SCPS system, and then some report search through the PSO. So let's look at the AMSEC standards and guidelines. When you look at cardioplegia, there's a lot of content in the standards and guidelines about monitoring. Dose, route, pressure, ischemic interval, that should all be monitored continually. The temperature should be monitored continually. The disposable should be recorded. And all of the above should be recorded in the patient record while being monitored. There are some notes. You should be using pressure monitoring, and it should be linked to servo regulations. So when you take that into effect, when you look at all the paths and all the 1,000 different ways you could set this up, that eliminates a handful of them. If you look at the AMSEC FMEA archives, it's a great resource. And unfortunately, currently, it's not, I learned personally that it's not connected by type. So you have to go through the master document and search for cardioplegia. But if you do that, you do get some additional resources and additional suggestions for how to set up and prepare if you would like to decrease your availability bias and look at errors that might be happening outside of what you have experienced personally. They talk in the FMEA archive about roller heads needing to be under or over occluded based on tubing size differences. So there's suggestions there for how to check your occlusions. Specialized pumps may be needed for hand cranks. That's another thing that's mentioned. They do say explicitly, cardioplegia systems should contain a bubble trap and have a bubble detector with intervention link. So now you really eliminate several paths in there because you're forced into using the bubble detector, and that bubble detector now is being said you should use that with an intervention link. Recirculate warm or cool water prior to attachment to the cardioplegia circuit to load test the heater cooler and the system as a whole. Set up your pressure monitoring to stop the pumps. So now you're saying you eliminate those other choices. You should use pressure monitoring. That pressure monitoring should be linked to servo regulation of your roller head. And then there's several references that discuss the types, volumes that don't necessarily eliminate all your options. So when you look at the AMSEC standards and guidelines, the FMEA together, they start to eliminate larger pieces of the options you have available in front of you. And now we look at the SCPS Safety Archive. The SCPS, for those that don't know, it's the Society of Clinical Perfusion Scientists of Great Britain and Ireland. They publish safety reports. They have an incident reporting system similar to the one that we operate. And I believe most, but not all of their reports are published, and you can review them. You have to go through one by one because there's no master search function, but they have 6 reports that are related to cardioplegia. They have accidental cardioplegia administration. They have a report on operational problems with the roller pump on bypass with giving cardioplegia administration. They have a report of emboli in the cardioplegia, obstruction of a filter on delivery of cardioplegia. They have 1 report of a runaway pump head, and they have a report of a similar drug label that I think didn't reach the patient. So The SCPS does not give recommendations, but if you look at these and you sit around and think about it, how could I prevent this in my practice? You start to eliminate, if you don't recirculate, or if you do recirculate, you will more likely to discover operational problems with the roller pump. Depending on how you recirculate, you might be able to eliminate detect more early or have an earlier detection of emboli that enter your cardioplegia circuit, and runaway pump head you may not be able to catch. Looking at the Piers 2 report archive, they also have 6 reports involving cardioplegia, and the Piers 2 reporting system has a lot of, I think they call them editor comments. Those include some suggestions. Thank you, Daniel, for the larger size there. And similar to the SCPS archive, there's reports here, 2 reports this time of mechanical obstructions of the cardioplegia delivery system, 2 reversals or partial reversals of flow, and 2 inappropriate delivery temperatures. So now we're starting to see some repeating trends here. We see multiple reports of mechanical obstructions or emboli in the system, partial reversals of flow. Again, if you sit down and think about that, I don't have the exact editor comments for each slide, but or for each report, but if you reverse or partially reverse your flow, probably by definition, but depending on how you set things up, you did not set up and recirculate your system. You must have just primed it and then not done any recirculation. Now, that's not always the case. It depends on what you've done, but certainly that's another path that you need to eliminate. And then inappropriate delivery temperatures. Again, in some situations, you may be able to eliminate the risk of that happening by load testing your cardioplegia system as suggested in the FMEAs. We have, I did a search of our PSO reports. We have 21 reports that involve cardioplegia. We reported 9 different complications on 4 different types of devices. And as we go through and analyze these reports, we generated 9 different suggestions for prevention. Now, not some of those suggestions are duplicated in the suggestions in either the ABCP system or the SCPS system or in the FMEAs. We do note that you should recirculate warm and cool water prior to attachment to the cardioplegia circuit and once attached to the cardioplegia circuit to load test both your heater cooler and the system. And again, that involves recirculation of the water in the or whatever medium your heater cooler is using, and the fluid in the blood path to the extent possible. Set up pressure monitoring to stop the pump at 500. And we have 6 additional suggestions that are not listed, have not been repeated elsewhere in the SCPS or the Piers 2 system, but they may be similar to reports that those systems have received. So when you look at all of these things, you can narrow down, and my guess is that of the 1,000 different possible ways of setting up and operating your cardioplegia circuit, you're probably down to somewhere between 5 to 10% of those are realistically available for you to use if you would like to eliminate the risk of all these other events happening. So with that, by looking outside at scenarios others have experienced, you avoid designing your practice based on only the things that you have experienced or those close to you. And obviously, by thinking about these errors, you are likely to be able to either more quickly or more accurately diagnose a problem that occurs during bypass if it happens to occur to you. And I'm going to say you could decrease or narrow the window of all the possible choices in front of you by about 90%. It might be as high as 90%. So that initial 1,000, you may be down to only 50 or maybe even less ways to set up and prime your cardioplegia circuit to eliminate the risk of these known events happening to you. So to go back and answer the questions we had earlier, there are many ways to peel an egg. Is one way better than the other? Yes, in many situations it can be. Are all the techniques equivalent? They're not always equivalent. What tools can we use to eliminate risk bias in our practice? We can use the experience of others. That comes in the AMSEC standards and guidelines, the AMSEC FMEAs, and the various different reporting systems that are out there. Thank you again for your time. I'll leave this up here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. And now we'll take any questions.
I have one for Anita because your story was amazing. Thank you. We've gotten so much online activity for that. So thank you. I'm just wondering, do you have any insights or helpful hints for maybe perfusionists who have never been on a mission trip or nervous about going?
Yeah, hello? Oh, I have to press. Hello? Okay. Yeah, it's definitely a nervous thing to do because you're kind of like going with a team of people that you don't know and putting yourself out there. But it's also such like a growing experience too. Like it forces you to get out of your comfort zone, to meet people, and make connections that you probably wouldn't normally do if you didn't have that opportunity. So I just say like, take a chance. You're just gonna like grow and like, it's only gonna bring good things.
Great, thank you. And as from a perfusion standpoint, I've heard a lot of people, they get nervous because they're worried about pieces of the circuit failing. Do you think it helped you grow as a perfusionist and help deal with those situations?
Yeah, definitely. We had definitely pieces of the pump falling off, like our light was just barely hanging on by the internal wires that we would daily just tape back on. And then even just seeing that new method of giving cardioplegia, I just never thought that that would be a possibility, that you could just pressure bag, connect it to your like antiquary needle to tubing, giving to anesthesia and just squeezing it in to deliver it. That was just so eye-opening that that was even a possibility, but that's like the kind of thing you want these trips will do. They're not going to try to utilize the supplies that the home team has. They'd rather come up with a different way to deliver while they're doing their cases.
Thank you. We have a question from our online community. They're asking, is there a lot of improvising when going on a mission, like piecing together equipment you are not used to?
Yeah, there's definitely improvising. I think the perfusionist that I was there with, Lazo, he kind of came down and made some modifications to the circuit that the home team was using. Because that was kind of like, that's what he was used to. So that's what he did. Also just, I think with that experience of Lazo being with the team for 15 years, and this is his main job, that he goes hospital to hospital, like he's just so used to it. And so he knows how to come up with these like solutions, and being able to observe how he thinks and how he works with the home teams it's really eye-opening and interesting. And then even the solution for the ACTs, like we were scared, are we gonna have to cancel cases? No, we'll just split them in half and hope it works out.
Great, thank you.
Luke.
Hi, Luke Burst from Iowa City. Thank you all three for great talks. I really enjoyed them. Michael, I'm a little bit biased because I do some work for ORRUM, but the way you presented here to just how we should approach these safety reports, I think it's brilliant, and I think you should come right behind. Your talk should have come right behind the opening ceremony, so everybody could hear this. But my question is, how can we enforce, or maybe not enforce, but encourage this behavior other than doing it in the normal US way, like throwing a lawsuit at someone? How can we enforce this behavior or stimulate this behavior?
Well, thank you, Luke, and I appreciate your kind words, but I'll also say that I was probably late to the game on getting content for our talk over. So I'm very happy that we got a chance to present and not at all, concerned about the time slot. How do we encourage reporting or adopting the idea of looking at reports?
Like thinking about this, like not just saying, "Oh, I like the colors, so that's why I do it."
Yeah,
but
well, it's a good question, and I think that it's something that we haven't really thought about in our profession before. But a lot of these events. Let's take theoretical emboli in your cardioplegia circuit. When you look at those events, if you could look at all the events that are available to review, you would see that there's a lot of commonalities among them, and there is one or two ways to set up your cardioplegia circuit to avoid that from happening. Now, it is a rare event. Let's say it happens one every 5 or 10,000 cases, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should avoid it. The theoretical perspective that I'm currently holding is that we should set up and test for any reasonable risk, independent of it being slightly longer or not including the colors that we like. Because it doesn't happen often is not a good reason to shrug it off, I guess.
And just a follow-up question, like how are we going to avoid to fall into recursion? Like if we can train everyone to do the behavior, and I'm talking a microsystem now, one center, you do a behavior and then the events stop occurring, are we then going to go back into the availability bias? The events are not happening anymore, so we're not paying attention to them again. I know it doesn't, I don't know if there's any research on that, but
Not that I know, but I'm certainly open that someone has, maybe in human factors or behavioral areas, has looked at that more than any of us have.
From the virtual audience, for Mike again, what is the rate or number of reports currently in the ORRUM safety database?
We can't say a rate because we accept reports from both identified and anonymously from anywhere. So we're unable to say a rate. Currently, earlier in the week, we had about 195 reports, and we've completed analysis on about 170 to 175 of them. And we're getting reports regularly. I'm very happy with how many reports we're getting. And I don't know if this goes on the coattails of what Luke was asking, but I'm really heartened to see, I was sharing with some of the AMSEC board of directors, really heartened to see people putting in reports that are isolated failures of the perfusionist, and they're not afraid to put those reports in and even put their name on there, knowing that that information is confidential and privileged. And obviously the purpose has to be to get it out, to help other people understand what's going on. So I've been really it's hard to see that those events happen, but they do. And it's really heartening to see people put them in so that other people can learn from them.
Okay, another question from the online community for Mike. It says, can you report worldwide or only in the US?
It's a good question that you can report worldwide. I don't know what the protections are legally for areas outside the US. So we have an anonymous online reporting portal. It's perfusionsafety.com. And you can go there from anywhere in the world and submit a report. Once the data reaches us in the US, it has protections that occur under the Patient Safety Organization through the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which is a division of the US Department of Health and Human Services. And once we get the information and the data is with us, it's protected. The information that we send back out is protected. But once it leaves the US, I don't have a full grasp on that just yet.
A couple more related to Anita's presentation. Someone asked why aren't there adult perfusion missions? And there definitely are. The Perfusion Without Borders part of AMSEC's webpage lists a lot of the organizations that do mission trips, both adult and pediatrics. Anita's was specific to the student scholarship, but there is also a specialty care scholarship for practicing perfusionists as well. And then they asked if there was a second perfusionist on a trip. Anita.
Yeah, so we just had Lazo as the NCA. He was with the NCA, and then there were the 3 perfusionists at King Faisal Hospital, TG, Peter, and Emmanuel. And the goal was more for Lazo to be an assistance to them, for them to be pumping the cases, and to get the experience of pumping these more complex cases.
Do you think having a second perfusionist with you is necessary?
Like a second person.
Not from the local area, another traveler.
I think
Yeah,
like a local traveler doing mission work, like two.
correct, like another CCP with you.
I mean, it might be beneficial. It seemed like we definitely, with the three, because they were there every single day. So there was the three of them plus Laza plus me. There's a whole crew of us. It might be beneficial, but there's only one OR. We're only dealing with one case at a time. If there are multiple ORs going, then yeah, definitely having two people, one for each room would be helpful.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll finish up a few minutes early. Our next session starts at 11:30, I believe, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you. 11:15.